Hi there and welcome to another episode of Techifi Talks, the vlog series where I talk to somebody within the software engineering industry about their career and also find out about their views within the industry. I'm delighted that this week's guest is Clare Sudbery. Clare is a software engineer from Manchester who also blogs about various topics within the sector that she works in. Clare, how are you?
I'm good, thank you.
Yeah,
thank you for inviting me.
No, thank you for coming on. Much appreciated. The second guest on, so I'm still getting used to interviewing people, so to speak. So hopefully it all goes smoothly. But obviously, if you are watching this in the future, we are sort of, I wouldn't say right in the middle of coronavirus. We're kind of hopefully towards the end of it anyway. So yeah, how's everything been for yourself over the time?
Well, you see, I mean, we were just chatting about this. I'm not a fan of remote working. So it's been frustrating for me because I do prefer, because I'm a big one for communication and collaboration. And I really enjoy being in the same room as my colleagues and all of that extra communication that happens, those little chats, things that you overhear, the ability to use non-verbal communication when you're in a room with people, not having to constantly interface via a screen. I do find it frustrating, but I'm coping.
Yeah. I think you're in the same boat as a lot of people, really. I think people would have thought, oh, great, I get to work from home for 3 months. But now I think some people are starting to think, oh, I do need a bit of normality back. So yeah, I can completely understand. But like I say, thanks for coming on. I'm obviously keen to discuss sort of about your career and your views on the industry and obviously, first of all, your blogs that you write as well. Can you tell us a bit about those?
Yeah, so I've got 2 blogs. I've got one called In Simple Terms, which actually that started after I had a conversation with Martin Fowler, who I was very privileged to meet because I used to work for ThoughtWorks, and we were talking about writing because obviously that's his big thing. He is a writer, and he was asking about the writing that I do, and I said that I had a blog, which is my other blog, which is a Medium blog called A Woman in Technology, and on that blog I spend quite a lot of time crafting the posts and editing them and formatting them and putting images in, and takes a lot of time, and it means that I hardly ever publish any content because I never find the time to perfect a post and publish it. So like a lot of people, I think I have a lot of half-written posts, but I'm a person who takes notes constantly about everything. And he suggested, I can't remember who it was, but he mentioned the name of another of our ThoughtWorks colleagues and said, what they did was that they just published their notes. And that way you can expressly say these are just notes and you don't have to worry about formatting them, making them beautiful. And it means that those notes that you're taking actually get published. So that's what In Simple Terms was about, because I do constantly take notes, and I don't publish all of them by any means, but if I've just kind of made some notes on a topic that I think might be useful to other people, I just publish them. And there's a proviso at the top saying these are just notes. It's deliberately aimed at kind of being as simple as possible, and also the title In Simple Terms, because I do always try to explain things in a way that I will understand in 6 months' time, and I am a bear of little brains, so I have to explain things in simple terms for my own benefit, but that's also useful for other people. So that's the aim of that one. And then the other blog it goes into more detail, and also tends to be it's not just tech. In Simple Terms is more techy. There's a few non-tech posts on there, whereas A Woman in Technology, there's some technical stuff on there, but it's not much about IT. Actually, there's stuff about maths, there's stuff about being a woman in tech, but actually tech stuff, not so much. It's more kind of got more of a human side there, I think. But I hardly ever publish any content, so I never find the time for it.
Yeah, I imagine that you're very, very busy. Obviously, I know the kind of stuff that you do, so yeah, I know that you must be busy. But I've never heard of that way of sort of doing things before, just sort of small little snippets, really. And I suppose it's kind of like when people see quotes, really, isn't it? And it kind of sticks with them. I think me being me liking sort of simplicity, I think I'd probably get a lot of value of it that way, because if I see a huge block of text, I switch off more or less straight away, because I don't think I've got the attention span and I don't take things in that way. But if somebody bullet points something for me or gives me a little snippet of something, getting straight to the point, I'm more
Yeah.
likely to take it in. Do you work like that normally?
Yeah, totally do. And funnily enough, I didn't mention it because it's not primarily aimed as a public facing thing, but I also have a third site which I just created this year, which is for my own benefit really, but it's publicly available and I do share links with people when they're relevant, and that is literally just my notes. And because I take ludicrous quantities of notes, like after spending a year working for a company last year, I ended up with 75,000 words in a document that got shared with them, and those notes they're scatty, they're mostly just bullet points, and they're just for me to remind myself, oh, how do you do this thing, how do you do that thing, what's that thing called again, and that I'm now gradually kind of gathering those together and publishing them, because it's just the easiest way for me to be able to access them and search them. So that it's just a thing called Clare Wiki, which is really my own wiki of all of the notes that I've made. But that is also, can be really useful. And that is totally not composed at all. It's just bullet points.
Good stuff. Fantastic. What I will do is after, or should I say, when the video is published, I will put all the links to Clare's stuff in the description as well, so you can go and check them out, and obviously all of and the best place to contact Clare as well. So so obviously getting, I suppose, onto your career then. So where did it kind of start for you then, really? So when did you decide that you wanted to be a software engineer?
It was a long time ago. So I've lost track now, but I've been in the industry for something like 20 years. And that started 24 years ago, or whatever the number is, +4, because there was a 4-year gap in the middle. But I was a housing officer for Manchester City Council. Yeah, and I had a maths degree, but I didn't really know what to do with it. I'd originally planned to become a maths teacher. That was my life plan. But while I was at university, I knew some teachers actually, and some maths teachers, and they talked me out of it. And that was kind of late 80s, early 90s. And things were beginning to change quite significantly in education, and people were very disillusioned with being a teacher, and people talked me out of it, that I probably wouldn't enjoy it. But that did mean that I kind of had this maths degree that I wasn't doing anything with, and I just kind of drifted into a job as a housing officer, which wasn't my life ambition. And I had a boyfriend who was a games programmer for a company in Manchester called Software Creations, which doesn't exist anymore, I don't think. And he and all of his friends were games programmers. And I was thinking, why am I not doing something like that? I'd be really good at that kind of thing. But I mean, literally, because this is a long time ago. This was in the early 90s. And it was possible in those days to actually live your life without barely even using a computer. And I had done a maths degree without doing any computer studies. And that's because actually, when I say maths degree, I lie slightly. It was maths and philosophy, joint honours. And because they were trying to tailor a degree that was like mixed between two faculties, I mean, philosophy is in the arts faculty, and let alone two subjects, the stuff that got dropped was in fact the computing. So I did lots and lots of logic. I did philosophical logic, mathematical logic, but no computing. And I wrote my essays with a pen on paper. So I mean, I really
pen and paper. What's one of those?
So I'd played around a little bit with a Spectrum and a BBC Micro at school, but I didn't really have barely any IT knowledge, even as a user. But I thought, I bet I'd be really good at that, because I've got a highly logical brain, highly analytical, and I thought, I bet I'd really enjoy that. So I went back to university and I did a master's in computation. And it was a 12-month course, and it was actually designed to take non-computing graduates, a lot of them arts graduates, and kind of turn them into computing graduates. And so that was a 12-month course, and then I came straight out of that and just walked into a job as a software engineer. It wasn't at all hard with a master's and with a maths degree.
So you kind of fell into it then, really, didn't you?
Yeah, I mean, it was deliberate. I was deciding this is going to be my new career. But yeah, it was perfect for me. So I got a job as a C++ programmer, writing Windows desktop software in Windows 3.1. It was 1995. And yeah, that was me then. Although funnily enough, I did it for 12 years. I was a software engineer for 12 years, and then actually I stopped. I got quite disillusioned with it. I got kind of stuck in a role where I wasn't really progressing, and I wasn't getting the chance to do the stuff that was really interesting. And I actually got quite bored of it, and I did leave IT altogether, and that was the 4-year gap. And I became a maths teacher, funnily enough. I did do it, and discovered why I'd been warned off it. I didn't actually last long at all. But that wasn't even the full 4 years. I actually spent 2 years as a freelance writer, and then a year doing PGCE teacher training, and then a year as a teacher. I didn't even complete the year of being an actual full-time teacher, and then came back into IT, and that was something like 8 years ago. And it's in the last 8 years that I've become really, really excited about IT in a way that I thought I would be before, but just the way that my career went, it didn't really work out. I kind of got bored and sort of disillusioned and kind of demoralized. But when I came back in, I had this kind of new thirst for knowledge, and things felt very, very different.
Yeah.
So yeah, the last 8 years have been very different.
Yeah, I think what you said then. I mean, obviously, I've worked in recruitment for a long time now, and a large proportion of people that I speak to, one of the reasons why they look to move positions is boredom. Really, you know, they aren't progressing, or they're continuously doing BAU stuff, or you know, they're not working with latest technologies, and there's no sort of product roadmap, or you know, something like that. And I think as a creator, because to be a software engineer, you've got to be creative, haven't you? You've got to have a bit of that analytical mindset. You've got to have that problem solving ability. And I always think that if those sort of bits in your brain aren't being kind of tested, particularly as an engineer, that's when I think you'll get bored and maybe look elsewhere, or like you did for a bit, even go out of the industry, really. As well. So, but to roll it back then to when you started, and obviously you mentioned it was 95. I always remember 95 because that was the year that United lost the league to Blackburn on the final day of the season. So it was a bad memory.
I'll take your word for it.
That was a bad year for us. But so obviously back then, and I mean, I know obviously you've done some bits around women in tech, and obviously it's been a good I suppose talking point really for a good number of years now. But how were women in tech sort of perceived in the 90s then?
It's funny, it wasn't something that got talked about. You know,
right.
I was very aware that I was in a minority, you know, and it wasn't something that was new to me, because it had been the same when I did my maths degree. It was the same when I did my maths A level. I mean, I was a secondary school with quite a small sixth form. So all of our A level class sizes were quite small. There were about 8 of us doing maths, and I was the only girl. And then I did a maths degree, and I don't know, maybe 10% of us were girls. It was, you know, I was absolutely used to being surrounded by males in all of the techie stuff that I did. And when I joined, when I got my first job as a software engineer, initially I was the only woman. I don't know, I can't remember, a couple of years in, another woman joined our team. But yeah, it was just something that I just sort of took for granted. And with hindsight, it was absolutely relevant, that it had an impact. It had a negative impact in terms of my own perception as much as anything else. that I just assumed that men would probably be cleverer than me, and that, you know, the kind of the sexism had just got internalized. That I was very insecure. I was very aware when I joined that I had only done a 1-year master's, and before that I'd barely even used a computer. So I'd learned how to program computers in a year with no trouble, because actually I was right. My brain is absolutely ideally suited. It's a perfect career for me. But still, I'd only been doing it for a year, and I was, you know, a lot of my they were all men, and they'd been doing it since they were kids. You know, they'd been kind of living, eating, and breathing computers, and I hadn't. And I felt like they all knew more than me. I always thought that everybody else knew more than me. I always felt like everybody else was cleverer than me. And I did find myself, I would notice sometimes I would just, like, for instance, if I walked into a meeting and there was another woman in there, I would assume that she wasn't technical, that she was, you know, administrative or something to do with personnel or something. And I made the assumption that women weren't good at tech, even though there I was right in front of myself, a perfect example of a woman who could do tech. I would assume that women couldn't, and that men would probably be cleverer. And I didn't even believe, if you asked me, I would have said that's ridiculous and outrageous, but there was still a part of my brain that thought that, and that therefore really struggled to believe that I could do it. And I think part of the problem for that whole 12-year period was that one of the reasons that I ended up just sick of the whole thing and leaving was that I never had any belief in my own abilities. I always thought that, and you know, the company that I worked for before I left the industry, I had been asking for 6 years to work on the meatier stuff, the more complicated stuff, and just continually being knocked back. And I assumed that was just because I wasn't clever enough. I don't think that is what it is. That I don't think that was true at all, but that was what I thought. I'd internalized that concept. And I still battle against that. You know, I still have to, like, consciously remind myself, yes, I definitely can do it. No, men aren't cleverer than women. You know, all women are capable of doing this, but you know, that sexism is just everywhere. And you know, and it's really subtle, and just from the simple things like people don't give girls Lego to play with when they're children. It's absolute, people treat girls differently to boys. They don't give them challenging things, or they encourage them to build things. And it is still, people don't realize, people don't see it, but it is everywhere. And yeah, I think it had a big impact.
Cause I find it really, really interesting, because I mean, what I always think is that, you know, there shouldn't be this kind of divide anymore in saying, oh, that's a girl's job or that's a man's job. You know, I think you should be able to do whatever job that you want, you know, whatever it may be. The thing that annoys me most, it isn't about the whole sort of women in tech thing. It's more about a lot of businesses now, they have these diversity targets, which kind of, I think, kind of complicates things a bit, really. I mean, because I know that I've worked with businesses in the past saying, right, well, we have to hire this many women this year in these particular roles. And I kept, and not arguing, but I sort of looked on the other side and said, well, if we say approach 200 women for these particular jobs and nobody wants it, what are we supposed to do? You know, kind of thing. Are we meant to not fill the roles, or, you know, just so someone can tick a sheet and say, right, well, we've got the, you know, obviously we would love to have, you know, 50-50, you know, kind of thing, but it isn't always possible. And I think it does complicate things a bit. I mean, what's your kind of view on that, in saying we have to hire 10 women, you know, for example, for 20 jobs?
I can see both sides of it. There are problems on both sides. So it focuses you. So having some kind of quota does give you, it gives you a focus, and it makes you work harder at it. And also you have to acknowledge that unconscious bias exists, that people will make judgments about women without even knowing that they're doing it. So just the simple study, I don't know if you've heard of, where they took a CV. It wasn't even in IT, actually, I don't think, but they took a CV that described a high-level senior person within a particular industry. It was like CEO level, I think, and they described this person as being, you know, really dynamic and really go-getting, and took no prisoners, and was very strong, was a strong leader, and would get things done. And they showed this CV to a bunch of people, and they said, right, what do you think about this person? Would you hire them? Would you like to work with them? And they gave the exact same CV to each of two groups of people, but in one case they made it a woman, and in the other case they made it a man. And in the case of the man, everybody said, oh yeah, they sound great, brilliant, yeah, I'd love to work with them, I'd love to work for them, absolutely. And for the woman, they said, oh, she sounds like a right bitch, you know, no, wouldn't want to work with her, wouldn't want to work for her, you know. And people, without even realizing it, make judgments about women. And similar things, you know, that you hear loads of stories about women talking highly technical, and people will do things like assume that it's not really their own knowledge, that somebody else has told it to them, or that they don't really know what they're talking about, or that they're just being like show-offs, or, you know, and people judge women differently, and make different assumptions about women's abilities and what they're saying. And so by having quotas, you force people to go past that. So that's all in favor of quotas. The big negative for me is that, yeah, I mean, there are logistics, because you just might not have the pipeline. Although I do think that it focuses you on trying to create the pipeline. So for instance, one thing that I've seen work well in lots of places is to deliberately create opportunities for women who are inexperienced and train them up. So using things like training schemes and academies and that kind of thing, that can be really effective. But the problem is that it means that the women who come in via those schemes are always going to be worried that maybe they're not really good enough. Maybe they only really got the job because they were a woman rather than because they were capable. And not only do they think that, but people around them will think that too. And that's quite destructive. That doesn't help with confidence, and confidence can be a big problem. So
yeah, I think as well the emphasis that is put on it adds more pressure, really, as well, you know, in terms of, like you said, about sort of going through different kind of coding academies, or you know, things like that. I think stuff like that does add more pressure, but you know, I just find it all a bit ridiculous. You know, no matter your gender, to me, you're a software engineer, you know, and there's fantastic female software engineers out there. I know a lot of lead software engineers who manage men every single day, and you know, they're absolutely fantastic. And I think as well, it was a conversation that I was having the other day, you know, software engineering, I suppose back in the day, it used to be, oh, stick the engineers in the corner, out the way, and you know, stuff like that. But software engineering is a cool job now. You know, people want to do it now, and people are seeing, you know, the benefits, I suppose, from a creative point of view. But you know, the amount of, you know, tech businesses or tech related businesses that are out there now, even, you know, law firms, they're getting software engineering teams, and who'd have thought that, you know, kind of back in the day. And so I think it's just going bigger and bigger and bigger now, really.
See, that's interesting, because I worry that's not true enough. That it's still generally the case that people see software engineering as something that geeks do, that people don't identify with the type of person that might do it. They don't see it, they see it as being boring and too difficult, and they worry that they'll get judged for not being clever enough, that you have to be super clever. So it's really interesting to hear you say that. It's encouraging to hear you say that, but I still think that, you know, that if we're going to address the lack of talent, the lack of skills, then there's still a bit of a way to go in terms of encouraging people to join this industry.
Yeah. No, what I always say, or when I first started in recruitment, and I told people, oh, I work in recruitment, and they say, oh, well, what's recruitment? So you'd say what recruitment is, and I say I recruit software developers for businesses. What are software developers? And at that time, I mean, you're talking maybe sort of 10 years ago now. So in plain and simple terms, or they develop websites. It was the easiest thing, you know, to like tell people. But now it's a case of, well, you know, that phone that you're holding, you know, how do you think Facebook gets here? How do you think Twitter gets here? How do you think the Amazon app gets on your phone? And then they go, oh, of course, yeah, kind of thing. And so I think people are now seeing sort of the power of technology and what software engineers do now.
It's interesting, actually, because I thought you were, I'm very glad that you didn't, but I thought that you were going to say that now software engineering is less about just having a conversation with a computer, just a person talking to a piece of machinery, and it's more about people collaborating and communicating with each other. That's a good thing. I'd be happy to hear you say that, and I agree with that. But what people can say is, and because of that, therefore, it's better suited to women because women are better at communicating and collaborating. And I have two problems with that. One is this idea that women are better at communicating and collaborating and have better people skills, which is not actually, it's funny, there's a fascinating book called Delusions of Gender, by a woman called Cordelia Fine, where she addresses that idea that women are more empathetic, that they're better at communication, they're better at looking after people, they're nurturers, they're caregivers, and it's not necessarily true. It's just that that's what we're expected to do, and so therefore we end up doing more of it. So we get more practiced at it, and people assume we will do it, but it's not necessarily true in terms of actual brain function. Not necessarily true at all. And one of the problems that can happen for women in tech is that, for instance, and it's happened to me a few times in my career, that people have tried to promote me out of tech and into management because they've been like, oh, you've got great people skills, come and manage people. And I'm like, yeah, but I want to write code. Yeah, but you've got great people skills. I'm like, you know what? Yeah, I might have, but it's not my favorite thing. I don't want to spend my life managing people. Actually, and interestingly, when I joined the industry, the thing that really appealed to me was that I could just go and sit in a corner and talk to a computer all day, and I wouldn't have to talk to people.
Yeah, no, having got to know you over a number of years, I do think that you obviously would be a fantastic manager, but I couldn't see you constantly doing one-to-ones and pay reviews and stuff like that. I think you always need that kind of technical challenge, don't you?
Yeah. It's interesting because actually now working for Made Tech as a technical lead engineer, I do have some line management responsibilities. And also, you know, over the last few years with ThoughtWorks as well, and a little bit before that, I was moving more into leadership roles, having avoided it for a long time and deliberately tried not to, because partly because I didn't want to be management and I didn't want to be managing people, partly because I just really wanted to talk to computers, partly because I didn't have confidence in my ability to do a leadership role, partly because I thought it would just be stressful and I'd be in loads of meetings all the time and I wouldn't get to do what I really wanted to do. And it took a long time, like, you know, a long way through, like the last, you know, after about 15 years, finally, okay, well, maybe I could cope with having that word lead somewhere in my job title. And it's quite interesting because I discovered that actually in the right context, I can really enjoy it and be really good at it. It's like, you know, as part of technical leadership, because I do care about people and I do actually really care about teams as being groups of people and nurturing people and mentoring people and facilitating and creating an environment that software engineers will flourish in. That's actually something I can get on board with, but it's taken me a long time to go, well, okay then. And also the other thing that's happened is the industry has changed. It's a lot easier now to find roles like I'm in now and like I was at ThoughtWorks, where technical leadership is still hands-on.
Mm-hmm.
You're still
Yeah.
primarily a technologist. You can move into a leadership position without having to stop being
Yeah.
a technologist.
Yeah. I used to always say, I mean, you're probably talking about 5 years ago now, but you used to always get to that point of a engineer's career where they used to get to say lead developer, and then it was either go completely hands off or go contracting. You didn't have that best of both worlds at that time.
Yeah.
And I think that's what people struggle with. Some people didn't want to go into management, and so they went contracting because they'd be still hands on, kind of thing. But I think you're massively right that the industry has changed now, where you can get to that certain level and still have the best of both worlds, really. As well. So I mean, obviously we talked about the start of your career then, as well, and sort of moving forward through. How was your skill set sort of changed? I was having this kind of conversation with James, who was the first guest on the vlog, and I asked him sort of, did his skill set change over the years because of an interest in a particular technology, or did you have to change your skill set because you saw the industry changing and you saw sort of what businesses were hiring for and what was becoming more popular?
In the first part of my career, my skill set purely changed because of what people were hiring for, I guess, and because of what the companies I was working for were doing. So, for instance, I moved from C++ to C# because that's what the industry was doing, and it happened within the companies that I was working for. We in the last job that I had, I started moving away from C# and towards VB under protest, and that was not because I wanted to. That was because the company that I was working for was doing that, and that actually was one of the nails in the coffin. That was one of the reasons I just got sick of the whole thing and didn't want to do it at all anymore. And it was and because at that time I was very much just an individual software engineer writing software and not really interested in anything else other than just writing software. And again, kind of very much just there being a one-to-one relationship between me and a computer. And there was obviously communication and collaboration with my teammates, but not that much. And then after that 4-year gap, when I came back into the industry, two things changed. One was that I started doing web development. And again, that was because of the industry. It was interesting that for the first 12 years, it was all desktop software. I never did any web development at all. It very much felt like web development was just another thing that other people did, and I didn't really know how to do it. But when I came back into the industry, really just because the company that I got a job with specialized in taking on graduates and training them up, and I deliberately was attracted to the company because I'd been out of the industry for 4 years with no intention of returning. I thought I'd left forever, so I hadn't been keeping up with developments. I'm just going to close my window because there's fireworks going off outside. So I was God knows. So I never understand why people let fireworks off during daylight. It's like, well, you can't see them.
Pointless.
What's the point?
Pointless.
Yeah. Anyway, so there'd been this 4-year gap, so my skills were really out of date. I'd made no attempt to keep up with the industry, and anyway, like I'd said in my previous job, my skills had kind of gone backwards. So I was already out of date anyway, even when I had still been in the industry. And I didn't want to have to pretend that I knew loads of stuff that I didn't. And I'd got used to a lower salary as a teacher anyway. So I came back in at entry level. I got a job with a company that took on graduates and trained them up. And I was like, just pretend I'm a graduate and train me up. Pretend I know nothing, And they were a web development company. So it was all asynchronous, it was all JavaScript, and this was, it was a bit mind-bending for me at first, because it is very different. The difference between desktop software and web software, because everything's asynchronous, and you have to understand the concept of client and server, and it did kind of blow my mind at first. But so I became a web developer just because that was the company that I got a job with. But also I could see that web development was a really big thing, like the .com boom had happened, and it had become a much bigger thing than it was when I first joined the industry. And it felt like this is not something you can keep avoiding. You're not going to get away with not doing web development because everybody's doing it now. So yeah, I learned JavaScript and I learned web development, and that was because that's the way the industry was moving, and that's the job that I got. And then I suppose what happened over the next few years was that I learned about Agile, and I learned about extreme programming. So I started to learn Agile software development principles, and I started to learn about pairing and test-driven development, TDD, and continuous integration, and all of that stuff that I hadn't really known about before. But what came along with that was not just the technological know-how, but also the focus on collaboration and communication, and the revelation that actually I did quite enjoy working with people. And that it was okay. It wasn't that scary talking to people as well as computers. Yeah. And not only was it not so scary as I thought, that I actually quite enjoyed it and was quite good at it. And that really opened out my perspective and made me get a lot more excited about it. And so at that point, the thing that I've always struggled with is I'm not a specialist. I am a generalist. And it's not because I don't want to be a specialist so much as I can't, it's like there are just too many things that are interesting. I can't just focus on one because then I'd miss out on all the others. And there's so much going on, and also because of being a consultant, and I was a contractor for a while as well, you can't really get away with only doing one thing. Because particularly in consultancy, your clients are going to be very varied, and they're going to be in varied domains with varied technologies and varied tech stacks, and you can't get away with only knowing one. And what I realized anyway was that my skills are transferable. I understand the concepts, and it doesn't really matter what language or what tech stack it's being applied to. It's the general principles that I understand. And I will just, adjust my skills and knowledge according to whatever context I happen to find myself in. So yeah, I mean, my skills are totally just shaped by whatever work happens to be there. So as a consultant, what's the next client? What technology are they working in? Oh, there you go. Then that's going to be the thing I'm going to learn next. And in an ideal world, I would be directing, I'd be saying, right, now I'm going to learn this thing. But in reality, that tends to happen in my spare time. And it in terms of my job, it happens by accident. If I'm lucky, I might end up on a project that happens to be using a technology that I've been wanting to learn. And that's how I'll learn it, because I'm doing it. Or I might have a little side project going on at home where I'm learning something. But it's wherever the wind blows me, to be honest.
Yeah, no, you reminded me of a story that somebody told me years and years ago, when I first started out in recruitment, and it was I asked somebody sort of, if you're developing in a particular language, but you've been doing desktop stuff, well then why, surely that you can just do web stuff. I mean, you're working with the same language. And he said it's like getting a boat to travel on the road. It's like adapting a boat to be able to travel on the road as it does in the water. And it's always stuck with me. And like, I still don't know kind of what he meant by that really, but it obviously, in the back end kind of thing, there's a lot more that goes on underneath the water that you probably don't see in order for a boat to sort of, move really as well. And so that's what it always stuck with me, always.
You see, it depends, because in a lot of contexts, you're basically just taking different types of boats and adapting them for different types of water. And actually, it's more transferable than you would think. But there are contexts, there are things that are so different that, you wouldn't be able to easily transfer from one place to another. So for instance, moving between functional programming and object-oriented, that's a big change. It's possible, but it's, it's a lot easier to move from Java to C# than it is to move from C# to closure.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there are significant differences, or from C# to Go, you know, I mean, there are some leaps that are really big and some leaps that aren't. And sometimes people don't realize, so people get used to working in a particular context, and then they get scared. And I've certainly had that feeling that, oh no, I can't do this thing because I don't know how to do it, I've not done it before. And then you do it, you throw yourself in, you're like, oh, okay, I can do it. Because although it looked like it was really, really different, actually it isn't. It's really similar to other things that I've done. And I have that aptitude because I'm a software engineer. I'm capable of understanding this stuff. I just have to believe it.
Yeah, because I mean, Java and C# are only slightly syntactically different, aren't they? So they are quite transferable, you know, as an example, really. And you mentioned my kind of next question, really, that I was going to come on to about actually specialising in something. Do you think? I think you kind of answered it, really, but I suppose sort of maybe you know, maybe 15 years ago, or maybe 10 years ago even, you know, people used to say, well, I'm a C# developer, I don't do anything else, that's what I do, I'm blinkered, you know, this is my skill set, don't give me anything else. But I think in this day and age now, I mean, you've got to know maybe 3 or 4 languages now, haven't you, really, to be able to be seen as a, you know, a decent developer and be able to understand a lot more.
It's really hard for me to answer that, because that has been a change that has happened to me over the course of my career. I started out as a C# .NET developer. It wasn't even .NET. .NET didn't even exist, I don't think, when I first started, but very soon it did, or it certainly appeared on my horizon very soon after I started. But originally I was a C++ developer, and then very quickly I was a C# .NET developer, and that was my area of expertise, and I'm still most comfortable in .NET, more comfortable there than anywhere else. But it changed for me, and the reason it changed for me was partly, as I've said, because I went into web development when I came back into the industry, and then I kept jumping between companies because I kind of would get itchy feet and I'd be interested and I'd want to do something new. And then I became a contractor again because I realized that I enjoy variety and I wanted to do something different, and consulting fulfilled that same need for me, that it allowed me to switch between projects really easily. And because I was a contractor and then because I was a consultant, I had to be able to move between languages and technologies. There wasn't really any choice. And simultaneously, I realized I really relished that. I enjoyed that challenge. So what I don't know is, has that been true for the whole industry as well at the same time? Or was it just true for me because of the path that I took, because I moved into contracting and consultancy? Because I get the feeling it is still possible for people to say, I'm a .NET developer, that's what I do. There's enough work out there to do that. So what I don't know is how much the general industry has changed, and how much the change that I've seen in my own career is because the industry has changed, or how much is just because I've taken a different path in my own career.
No, I think you are right in the sense that, you know, you will get your, I suppose, just focused .NET roles, you know, you will, but over the past few years there's a lot more businesses now who, you know, maybe will put a couple of different languages on there because they've got different elements of the business that have been written in different stuff, really, and so they're looking, but I always think that they're looking for those developers who are not sort of technology agnostic, in terms of being open to working with whatever is put in front of them, and I think that's a business's way of maybe saying that, I don't know, these maybe won't be troublemakers, because they'll kind of, you know, oh great, I haven't touched this, so I want to go and touch that, you know, kind of thing. I haven't worked with PHP, you know, for example, before, so oh yeah, no, that's good. Instead of maybe these CEOs or managers now of maybe sort of 15 years ago who are just used to maybe dealing with people who say, no, I'm a .NET developer and this is all I do. I don't want to look at any other language. I'm fine doing what I'm doing. It's becoming more and more popular now.
I think
Definitely.
that's the way it should be. And certainly at Made Tech and also at ThoughtWorks, we deliberately recruit for generalists. We don't want people who are restricting themselves and saying, I can only do this. We want people who have that open mindset of, the kind of the growth mindset as well, of saying, you know what, I would be interested in learning anything, and I want to be able to transfer my skills, and I want to be able to, and actually, it doesn't matter whether I know every tiny little in and out of this one particular language. It's more important that I know how to learn. So it's not about, having an encyclopedic brain and knowing every tiny little language feature of a particular language. It's about knowing how to Google. It's about understanding what the questions are and knowing how to find the answers to those questions. Obviously, it's a bit more than just knowing how to Google, but actually, it's seeing that as a plus rather than a negative, that you're prepared to go look things up, and you don't have to memorize everything. And also what I've realized is, partly because I've experienced it myself, is that fear of, oh no, this is something I haven't done before, so I won't be able to do it. Actually, what I want to do as a facilitator is to encourage people to discover that they can do more than they thought they could. And just because they've only ever worked in one technology, it doesn't mean that has to stay true. And they can learn more than they realize. As soon as they lose the fear, it's the fear that's stopping them from learning, not their own ability. And that applies to me, and that's something I still have to keep learning over and over. The things that stop me from progressing are generally not ability, it's fear. And if you can change your mindset, instead of being afraid, be excited. Like, oh, I don't know about this. Fantastic. That means I get to learn a new thing. Not, I don't know about this. Oh no, there's something wrong with me. It doesn't matter. If you don't know it, it just means you're going to learn it. That's okay.
Yeah, exactly. I know. I actually remember the conversation that we had when you were thinking about going contracting. I actually remember it. It was I think it must have been roughly about 2012, something like that. I think it might have been. I remember that we met in Piccadilly Gardens, and I can't remember what the bar was called, but we met in there, and I remember just talking, and because, like I say, you didn't know sort of, maybe necessarily about the kind of contracting world at that time and what it involved. And just from talking to you, I knew that you would be suited to it purely because of the kind of questions that you were asking. You were interested, and that to me showed that you always need that kind of next challenge, next thing, something new, and to be able to have that variety within your brain of being able to work, like, kind of thing. I've always remembered it, always. And
it's funny because I can remember that too, and I can remember that place. It was on the edge of Piccadilly Gardens. Was it Crowbar? I think it was Crowbar.
That rings a bell.
Yeah,
I bet it's not there now, is it? I haven't been around Piccadilly Gardens for years.
There's a Byron there now, I think, or somewhere around there. But yeah, so and I actually, contracting turned out to be a really good thing to do. I didn't do it for long because there were drawbacks. But the thing that I really enjoyed and was really, really useful was that I discovered that I was capable of landing in an entirely new environment, hitting the ground running, learning really fast, and contributing quickly. And to be honest, that was the thing that I was scared of, and that was the thing I didn't believe I could do, and I found that I totally could do it. And by doing it repeatedly, I proved that to myself, and that was a really, really useful lesson, because by doing it over and over, I was like, because I actually did several short contracts, and each one was a new environment, new technologies, and every time I coped. I picked it up quickly and I started delivering value, and that proved to me that I was capable of doing that, and that had such a positive impact on my confidence. And got rid of the fear. Okay, I know now that I can just be dropped into any situation and I'll be fine. I'll just pick it up. I'll learn it. I can do that. I've proved to myself that I can do that.
Yeah,
Really,
definitely.
really useful.
Definitely good stuff. Hopefully my talk had something to do with it as well. But I doubt,
Well, yeah,
I doubt it.
well, I think you definitely helped me to believe that it was possible. Yeah.
I know, no, that was all you, definitely. And a completely kind of different subject now, really, but a massive talking point at the moment between the recruitment industry and also the software development industry as well is tech tests at interviews. Are you a lover or hater of them, or do you think that they have their purpose?
Well, I need to distinguish between my own personal preference and also, and what is advisable. So I love them because I'm a geek. And funnily enough, I've got a funny little story because I've written a couple of novels, and a few years actually while I was contracting, one of the reasons I thought contracting would be a good thing is I thought I'll be able to use the time between contracts to start writing another novel. And I booked a week in a cottage in the middle of nowhere. And I spent a few days trying to start writing a new novel and struggling and not getting very far. And then this one day, I really had just ground to a halt and I was getting nowhere. And I was between contracts. And while I was there, I got an email from somebody saying, there's this company that might be interested in giving you a new contract, but they want you to do this technical test. And it was a kata. I can't remember what kata it was, but it was a kata, and it was one of those where they let you do it offline. I love that. So not in the interview, but they do the exercise offline and then send them the result. And it was like 5 o'clock and I'd done almost no writing all day, and I was thoroughly fed up and thoroughly demoralized and not motivated at all. And then suddenly this came in. I was like, oh yeah, brilliant. And I stayed up till midnight writing this code for this kata and absolutely loving it. And that was what made me realize that at that point in my life, all of my creative energy was going into coding. And that was the thing that excited me. And that was the thing that I was motivated to do. And so, yes, I love them. I love technical tests that are done offline. I love doing them in interviews. I really enjoy pairing in interviews and kind of getting an opportunity to show what I can do in practice instead of just being asked abstract questions. But it does depend what you mean. So I've realized you said test and I heard kata, and that's not actually what you said. I'm not a fan of the tests that are like exams, where you kind of effectively sitting an exam. And again, it depends how it's structured, but if it's the kind where you're being asked, how do you do this complicated language feature in this particular language, and you're not allowed to Google it, I'm like, well, I don't know, I can't remember. I can kind of give you an outline, but that's one of those things I always have to look up because I forget the particular syntax of this particular command. I absolutely hate exams that are basically memory tests. I think they're ridiculous, pointless, because that's not how we do our jobs. I really like tests that are coding tests. The problem is that not everybody has spare time, so it's quite discriminatory. If you want people to do an offline coding exercise, for a start, you're discriminating against busy parents, because they're probably busy putting the kids to bed. They don't have that spare time. You're discriminating against anybody who has caring responsibilities or who lives in difficult circumstances, because not everybody goes home to a nice quiet environment at the end of every day. People are busy, and that is a problem. So there's that, and also just that people are different. Personally, I absolutely love it, but for some people it's hell on earth, and it just terrifies them, and it doesn't give them an opportunity to shine. And I think that actually what you need to do when you're recruiting is have a process that isn't too rigid, because you want diverse employees, and that means you have to have diverse recruitment techniques. You have to have techniques that will find people who have different strengths, because you don't want everybody who works for you to have the same strengths. So you need to give them an opportunity to shine in a way that works for them, rather than a kind of a rigid, everybody must be like this. So yes, I think the right kind of test can be great, but be aware that just because somebody doesn't pass that test doesn't mean that they're therefore not good at their job.
No, I've heard some recently as well. Actually, I've just heard some absolute, kind of horror stories really of what some businesses are actually making people do as part of the interview process, like literally more or less like building apps for them, kind of thing as part of the, and it's kind of like free work really as well, because I've seen stories as well, that people have done all this work, spent like 5 hours on this, mini project really at home as part of an interview, and then not got the job, but then that particular business gets to keep the code and, stuff like that. And it's, I think businesses have got to be careful as well, purely because there's so much competition now, because a software engineer could come on the market and they could get 30 interviews if they wanted to really, because there are that many, positions out there now. So I think you've got to keep your interview process engaging. Obviously, you've got to do your stuff internally, what you've always done, to make sure that you're trying to get the right people in. But I think if somebody's got, say, 5 other businesses that are interested in them and 3 of them are making them, say, doing a technical interview as part of the second interview, maybe when they're on site, and then another business is telling them to do a 5-hour test at home, they're not going to do the home one really, are they? Unless they're really interested in that particular business. So I think it's very, very fine margins, really fine margins.
I also have a controversial opinion that I think that people don't appreciate. I think people have this idea that when they're recruiting, they're faced with a pool of candidates that have varying quality, and all they're doing is plucking a candidate out of the pool who will either be brilliant, terrible, or somewhere in the middle. And then they put them in a job and they find out, did we get it right? Did we manage to find the brilliant people or the somewhere in the middle people? Did we manage to avoid the terrible people? And they think that it's set in stone, that the person they've plucked out of the pool was either brilliant, middling, or terrible, and that's just the way it is, and it doesn't matter what they do. They just have to hope that they manage to take the right person. And actually, I don't think that's the case. I think that much more than people would like to admit, whether somebody turns out to be brilliant, terrible, or middling is not about who they were or what they were like before you plucked them out of the pool. It's about how you treat them and what you do with them. I think you can create brilliant engineers, and you can, and it obviously, aptitude makes a difference, attitude makes a difference, but attitude will change. Like, you could hire somebody who has an amazing attitude and then treat them badly, and that attitude will evaporate. Similarly, you can hire somebody who's underperforming, treat them really well, nurture them, encourage them, foster a love of learning, and turn them into somebody who's like highly motivated and performing really well. And it's so much more about what you do with them after you've got them than people realize, I think.
Yeah. I think that the businesses that I've always enjoyed working with are the ones who kind of hire on potential, really, rather than saying, right, oh well, out of this big long list of technologies that we always require, they haven't got one of them, so we're not going to take them. I can't stand businesses like that. I just can't stand, businesses like that. It drives me mad, where they literally, right, they've got that. It's like a tick list, isn't it? It's like, oh no, well, they've got C#, they've got .NET, oh, they haven't used Angular, or, whatever it may be. And so it's
just short-sighted.
It can be frustrating, really
They're
frustrating.
shooting themselves in the foot.
Massively. Yeah. Interesting. And I mean, what would I suppose going on to kind of my last question, really. I mean, what would the Clare of what would the Clare now tell the recently graduated Clare? if you had to go
Don't,
and do it all again?
yeah, you know you're much better than you think you are. Don't be afraid that it's okay to not know stuff, that you are never going to, in 20 years time you're still going to not know stuff, and that's okay. Don't worry about it. Don't worry that other people know more than you do. Try not to compare yourself to other people, because everybody has gaps in their knowledge, everybody has insecurities, and when you're comparing yourself to other people, you're nearly always comparing your worst against their best, and you're ignoring their worst and you're ignoring your best. And actually, you know, you know more than you think you do, but also the stuff that you don't know, you will learn. You can learn. It's okay. It doesn't matter. When you come up against something you don't know, instead of being scared, be excited. That's what I would have said.
Definitely. Confidence is a fantastic thing, isn't it? But it can be a kind of sort of worry when it can turn into arrogance sometimes, doesn't it? And so as long as you keep that sort of confidence in yourself and keep believing and thinking that you don't know it all, you know, kind of
just
thing,
assume that you know nothing and believe you can learn everything.
Because in software engineering, there's a new thing out every single week in there, so you don't know anything.
And you're never going to know it all. It's not going to happen. Give up. Just stop thinking that way.
Always
you don't
keep
know it all, and you never will, and that's okay.
Definitely. Well, Claire, I really appreciate you taking the time out to have a chat about your career and obviously your views on the industry. If people want to follow up with you, is LinkedIn and Twitter, those
LinkedIn
two the best
and Twitter.
places?
You have to know how to spell my name. That's the thing that will catch you out. Claire has no I in it, and Sudbery ends ERY, the same as surgery. So people always struggle with that one. As long as you're spelling it right, you'll find me. I'm on Twitter and I'm on LinkedIn.
Yeah, cool. I'll put all of Claire's social links down in the description if you want to contact her. And if you could leave a like on the video, subscribe to the Techifi YouTube channel, leave any comments as well, any comments that are sort of directed at Claire. I'll follow them onto her and hopefully she'll be able to answer them, obviously within reason. Thank you for watching, I'll see you all again for another Techifi Talks.